Imagine you are standing on the banks of a river that no longer exists. Not the controlled, dammed Nile of the modern world, but a wild, surging artery of life cutting through a dying landscape. It is 13,000 years before the first pyramid is even a thought in a pharaoh's mind. The air is cold, a brutal, dry chill that bites at your exposed skin. You are crouched in the tall, sharp-edged grasses of the Caden marshes. Your breath comes in shallow, silent hitches. Beside you, your kin are motionless, their bodies painted in river mud to mask the scent of sweat and fear. You aren't hunting a gazelle, you aren't tracking a predator. You are waiting for the most dangerous creature the earth has ever produced. You are waiting for a man who wants what you have. Suddenly, the silence is shattered by a symphony of chaos. There is no shout of warning. There is only the mechanical clack of an atlatl spear thrower releasing a shaft of fire-hardened wood tipped with razor-sharp flakes of volcanic glass. You see your brother S-head snap back as a chirp point buries itself in his eye socket. The extraction point is a mile away, across a killing field of open silt. You are pinned, you are outflanked. And for the first time in human history, you are realizing that you are part of something new. You are not in a scuffle, you are in a war. This is the story of Jebel Sahaba. This is the moment humanity lost its innocence. For decades, we clung to the romanticized vision of our ancestors as peaceful wanderers, noble savages who only learned to kill in groups once we built cities and crowns. But the sands of Sudan have whispered a different truth. Deep beneath the surface of Cemetery 117, archaeologists have unearthed a nightmare that predates civilization itself. This is the earliest evidence of organized, systemic, and tactical group violence ever found on the planet. This is the world's first battlefield. To understand the carnage at Jebel Sahaba, we must first understand the world that forged it. We are in the terminal stages of the late Pleistocene. The Earth is a tectonic plate of climate instability. The Green Sahara is a memory, and the Big Dry has begun to take hold. Imagine the African continent as a shrinking island of resources. The Great Lakes are receding. The forests are thinning into scrubland. Every tribe, every family unit is being pushed toward the only reliable source of life left, the Nile Valley. But the Nile of 13,000 BCE was a treacherous mistress. This was the era of the Wild Nile, a period where the river would fluctuate wildly, swinging from catastrophic floods to desiccating droughts in the span of a single generation. The geopolitical tension of this era wasn't written in treaties or borders, it was written in the soil. If your tribe held a fishing spot, you lived. If you lost it, your children starved. The landscape was becoming a pressure cooker. As disparate groups were forced into closer proximity, the human element, our innate drive for survival, underwent a dark metamorphosis. The gear began to change. We see a shift in the lithic industry, the way stones were knapped. We see the birth of the microlith, tiny, razor-edged flakes of stone designed to be embedded into wooden shafts. These weren't tools for butchering an antelope. These were designed for maximum trauma against human soft tissue. These were the high-velocity rounds of the Stone Age. In the mid-1960s, a team led by Fred Wendorf began excavating a site near the border of Sudan and Egypt. They called it Jebel Sahaba. What they found was a graveyard of 61 individuals. But as they brushed away the dust of 13 millennia, a horrifying pattern emerged. This wasn't a site of natural death. This wasn't a plague or a famine. Every skeleton told a story of a violent end. The sophisticated, evocative language of the bones revealed a symphony of violence. Over 40% of the bodies contained embedded projectile points. This wasn't a single catastrophic event like a massacre of the defenseless. This was something far more chilling. Forensic analysis of the bone healing or lack thereof suggests a sustained campaign of attrition. This was a forever war of the Paleolithic. Imagine the psychological warfare of such a life. You live in a state of constant, low-grade terror. You know that every time you go to the river to gather water, you are in a kill zone. The heavy silence of a lost battalion hangs over these remains. Some individuals were struck by over 20 separate projectiles. In modern military terminology, this is overkill, a sign of intense dehumanization. You do unshoot a man 20 times with stone-tipped arrows unless you want to erase him from existence. The tactical detail revealed at Jebel Sahaba is staggering. We see evidence of flanking maneuvers, skeletons with arrowheads lodged in their backs, their sides, and their pelvises. This suggests that the attackers were using fire and maneuver tactics. One group would suppress the victims from the front with a volley of projectiles, while a secondary element moved through the brush to strike from the blind side. This is organized group violence. This is the birth of the skirmish line. But why here? Why then? To answer that, we have to look at the impossible odds these people faced. The landscape was a graveyard of rusted iron-colored sand and unforgiving heat. The Nile was their only extraction point from the encroaching desert. This was a war for vital space, a primordial Lebensraum. The human element of Jebel Sahaba is perhaps the most haunting part of the mystery. Among the dead are women and children, but they weren't just collateral damage. Their wounds show the same tactical precision as the men. They were targeted. In the grim logic of the First War, to kill the children of your enemy was to secure the resources for your own. It was a cold, calculated arithmetic of survival. We see perifractures on the forearms of the women breaks caused by holding up an arm to ward off the crushing blow of a mace or a club. This tells us about the gritty reality of the engagement. When the arrows ran out, when the atlatls were dropped, the conflict evolved into a visceral hand-to-hand struggle. This was close-quarters combat, CQC, in its most primitive and terrifying form. The smell of copper, the sound of breaking bone, the desperate gasps of the dying in the mud. As we peel back the layers of Jebel Sahaba, we are forced to confront a dark truth about our own nature. We often view history as a steady climb from barbarism to civilization. We like to think that war is a product of our systems, our religions, our nations, our ideologies. But Jebel Sahaba stands as a silent, ossified witness to the contrary. And there was the desire to destroy them. The geopolitical tension of the Nile 13,000 years ago was the blueprint for every conflict that followed. Yet, they were driven to a level of sustained, organized cruelty that mirrors the trenches of the Somme or the jungles of Vietnam. It is an ancient, deep-coded survival mechanism that triggers when the world grows small and the resources grow thin. The landscape was a graveyard of rusted earth, but it was also the birthplace of the soldier. Imagine a shaft of seasoned acacia wood notched at the end. Into these notches, warriors fixed tiny, razor-sharp flakes of chert and flint, bonded with tree resin and sinew. These weren't just arrows. They were jagged, serrated instruments of agony. They were designed to stay in, to fester, and to ensure that even if the initial strike didn't kill you, the subsequent infection or internal hemorrhaging would. The conflict at Jebel Sahaba was defined by what military theorists today call kinetic depth. Analysis of the 61 skeletons reveals that this wasn't a fair fight. This was an asymmetrical slaughter. We see evidence of a sustained engagement strategy. Of the individuals found at Site 117, many show signs of healed fractures and old projectile wounds. This tells us that the conflict was actually a series of raids and counter-raids that spanned months, perhaps years. You move in a tactical V formation just to reach the water's edge. Every high dune is a vantage point for an enemy sniper equipped with an atlatl. The adrenaline fatigue must have been staggering. As the distance closed, the nature of the violence shifted. The human element took over the raw, visceral fear of the close-quarters combat. We see the tactical brutality in the remains of the children. It is a hard truth to narrate, but the forensics are clear. The projectiles found in the younger skeletons were often delivered at point-blank range. This wasn't accidental collateral damage. This was a search and destroy mission. The goal was the total biological erasure of the competing tribe. One skeleton, labeled by researchers as Individual 44, provides the most haunting tactical detail. It is a woman found in a defensive posture. In her pelvic cavity and spinal column, archaeologists found over a dozen microliths. The trajectory shows she was struck from multiple sides simultaneously. This is the Symphony of Chaos. She was surrounded. She was the point of impact for a coordinated strike. The sheer number of points some call it overkill suggests a level of psychological warfare. The attackers weren't just killing her. They were sending a message to any who might be watching from the reeds. Then the mace work began. When the projectiles were spent, the heavy infantry moved in. We find massive blunt force trauma. On the skulls, circular fractures that match the dimensions of the stone maces found in the region. This was the extraction phase, but not for the victims. This was the systematic clearing of the site. The tactical error of the Jebel Sahaba people was likely their resource dependency. They were tied to a specific strategic point. On the river, a place where the fishing was good and the tubers were plentiful. In the impossible odds of the late Pleistocene drought, their greatest asset became their greatest liability. They became a stationary target in a world that demanded movement. They were fixed in position, and in the world of military strategy, a fixed position is a grave waiting to be dug. The turning point of the actual battle likely occurred when the primary defense was breached. Imagine the most skilled hunters of the tribe, the Paleolithic Special Forces, standing at the perimeter with their spear throwers. They are outmanned. They are outtouched. Once the first 2 or 3 of these defenders fell, the command and control of the group vanished. The remaining individuals, the elderly, the women, the children were left in a state of tactical disarray. The legacy of this specific conflict is written in the toll of the war. 61 bodies. In a world where total tribal populations might only number in the low hundreds. This was a decimation. This was a genocidal engagement. Why do we call this the real story? Because Jebel Sahaba shatters the myth of the peaceful past. It shows us that 13,000 years ago, humans already understood force projection. They understood area denial. They understood how to use the human element, the fear, the adrenaline, and the bond of the tribe to commit the unthinkable. The landscape was a graveyard of silt and stone, but it was also a laboratory of lethality. As the heavy silence of a lost battalion settled over the Nile Valley, the winners moved on, carrying the resources they had secured through blood. The losers remained, buried in the sand, their bones holding onto the stone points that killed them for 13 millennia, waiting for us to uncover the Symphony of Chaos that was the world's first war. This wasn't just a fight. This was a tactical revolution. Jebel Sahaba teaches us that the art of war didn't begin with the sword. It began with the calculated strike in the dark, the flanking maneuver in the reeds and the weight of the gear, on a man who had decided that his neighbor's life was the price of his own survival. The turning point of Jebel Sahaba was not a single arrow or a solitary cry of defiance. It was a fundamental shift in the human psyche, the moment the impossible became the inevitable. To understand how this conflict reached its fever pitch, we must examine the tactical error that sealed the fate of those 61 souls. In military science, we speak of fixed positions and mobile defense. The people of Cemetery 117 committed the ultimate prehistoric tactical blunder. They chose to stay. For 2 million years, the human survival strategy was simple: escape. If the climate turned, we migrated. If a predator grew too bold, we moved the camp. If a rival tribe encroached on our hunting grounds, we vanished into the horizon. But at Jebel Sahaba 13 millennia ago, the horizon was vanishing. The impossible odds were created by a planet in flux. The Sahara was breathing its last green breaths, and the Nile was the only extraction point left on a scorched map. The tactical error was the birth of territoriality. By settling in a semi-permanent camp to exploit the rich silts and fish of the river, these people had created a high-value target. They had accumulated logistical surplus, dried fish, gathered tubers, stone tools, and in the cold arithmetic of a dying world, surplus is an invitation to violence. They had traded their greatest asset mobility for a patch of dirt. They were now fixed in place, and their enemies knew exactly where to find them. The specific turning point of the engagement, the moment the defense collapsed, is written in the ballistics of the site. In any modern artillery barrage, there is a moment of saturation. Forensic mapping of Cemetery 117 reveals that the attackers utilized a force multiplier that changed the face of the battle, the atlatl. Imagine the technical advantage. A spear thrown by hand has a limited range and a predictable arc. But a spear launched from an atlatl weighted throwing board acts as a lever, increasing the kinetic energy and the standoff distance of the attacker. The turning point came when the attackers realized they did need to engage in risky close-quarters combat. They could sit back, out of range of the defenders' hand-thrown rocks, and rain down precision-guided munitions made of wood and flint. The turning point was the psychological collapse that followed this technological superiority. Imagine the human element. The defenders watching their brothers and sisters being struck down by invisible hands from a distance they could unclose. This was the shock and awe of the Paleolithic. When the perimeter was breached, it wasn't a heroic charge. It was a systemic failure of command and control. The act of bravery we see in the bones of the elderly men individuals who stood their ground with parry fractures on their arms was a desperate, rearguard action meant to buy seconds for a flight that was already doomed. As we move into the legacy, we must confront the toll of the war. The significance of Jebel Sahaba today is not just that it was the first, it's that it was patient zero for the organized slaughter we see in the modern era. Before this site, violence was impulsive, individual, and fleeting. Jebel Sahaba represents the industrialization of death. It shows that humans didn't just stumble into war. We engineered it to solve a resource crisis. The historical significance of these 61 individuals cannot be overstated. They are the silent witnesses to the birth of the soldier in the graves of Jebel Sahaba. We see the first evidence of military funerary rites, bodies laid out with a grim intentionality despite their traumatic ends. This suggests that the survivors, if there were any, viewed this not as a tragedy, but as a necessary sacrifice. They had begun to create the narrative of the fallen warrior, the foundation of every military culture from Rome to the present day. The heavy silence of a lost battalion hangs over the Nile today, but the echo of Jebel Sahaba is heard in every modern area denial weapon and every surgical strike. We carry the tactical error of fixed defenses in our walled cities. And we carry the human element, the capacity for both extreme bravery and extreme cruelty. In our very DNA, the dawn of death was not an end but a beginning. It was the first page of the real military history of our species. The toll of the war is still being counted. As we look back at the sun-bleached bones of Sudan, we are forced to ask, if Jebel Sahaba was the first war, will we ever see the last? Or are we destined to remain trapped in the Symphony of Chaos, forever replaying the tactical errors of our ancestors in a world that is once again growing small, crowded, and cold? The dust has settled on the banks of the Nile, but the air at Jebel Sahaba remains heavy with a 13,000-year-old silence. When we look at the 61 individuals recovered from Cemetery 117, we aren't just looking at a collection of bones. We are looking at the ruins of a society that was the first to experience the absolute toll of war. The legacy of Jebel Sahaba is not found in grand monuments or written epics. It is found in the forensic dossier of a lost generation. To understand the historical significance today, we have to look at the asymmetric cost. In any modern conflict, we measure victory in territory or political shifts. But at Jebel Sahaba, there was no victory. There was only biological attrition. The toll was total. We see the human element in its most tragic form, the targeting of the future. Nearly half of the victims were children. In the grim reality of Paleolithic total war, the goal wasn't just to defeat the enemy's warriors. It was to ensure the enemy had no tomorrow. This is the primal architecture of enmity. By removing the next generation, the attackers performed a tactical eradication that echoes through the millennia. For the premium global audience, the question is often, why does this matter now? It matters because Jebel Sahaba provides the geopolitical blueprint for our current world. It is the archaeological first that proves organized violence is not a byproduct of civilization, but a catalyst for it. After the conflict at Cemetery 117, we became a species of battalions. We must examine the climate crucible. Today, we face a hauntingly similar turning point. As modern water sources dwindle and arable land vanishes, the tactical lessons of Jebel Sahaba become terrifyingly relevant. We are seeing the return of resource-based conflict. Jebel Sahaba was the first water war. It was the first time. Tactical lethality was used to solve a scarcity crisis, the heavy silence of a lost battalion at sight. 117 is a warning. It tells us that when diplomacy fails and the extraction points of a society are threatened, the human element defaults to the Symphony of Chaos. Then there is the evolution of the soldier. Before Jebel Sahaba, a hunter was a provider. But the gritty detail of the wounds found at Cemetery 117 reveals the birth of a new social class, the professional killer, the officer class of the Stone Age. Someone had to coordinate the saturation. Fire. Someone had to plan the flanking maneuver. Someone had to lead the mace-wielding extraction teams. This is the genesis of the warrior caste. The legacy of Jebel Sahaba is the institutionalization of violence. It taught us that force projection is the ultimate currency. When we look at the skeletons of the men buried there, we see parry fractures on their left arms, vanguard position. They were trained. They were prepared. They were the first to stand in a skirmish line. The historical significance today is that Jebel Sahaba shatters the noble savage myth. It forces us to confront the innate capacity for organized cruelty. The landscape was a graveyard of rusted iron, and it remains so. Whether it is the flint-tipped microliths of the Nile or the precision-guided munitions of the 21st century, the tactical logic remains unchanged. Find the enemy, fix them in place, and eliminate their capacity to resist. The turning point for humanity was not the invention of the wheel or the taming of fire. It was the invention of the other at Jebel Sahaba. We stopped seeing us and started seeing them. We created the psychological warfare of borders and boundaries. The toll of the war was the loss of our shared humanity. Imagine the aftermath, the heavy silence of a village that no longer exists. The Symphony of Chaos has ended, leaving only the wind over the silt. The survivors, if there were any, carried with them the trauma of the First War. This trauma was passed down and coded in our stories, our myths, and eventually our military doctrines. We are the inheritors of the Jebel Sahaba legacy. Every artillery barrage, every surgical strike, and every hearts and minds campaign traces its lineage back to this sun-scorched cemetery in Sudan. It is the cradle of military history. It is the moment we decided that blood was the only way to secure the river. As we close the file on Cemetery 117, we must ask ourselves a final, sophisticated question. Is war an inevitable shadow of the human condition, or is it a tactical error we have been repeating for 13,000 years? The bones of Jebel Sahaba offer no answer. They only offer the gritty reality of the cost. They remind us that the real story of military history is not found in the maps of generals, but in the silence of the graves. The legacy of the First War is still being written, and as the world enters a new era of impossible odds and geopolitical tension, we must decide if we will finally learn the lesson of the lost battalion, or if we are doomed to join them in the Symphony of Chaos. 13,000 years later, the sand is still shifting, and the dawn of death is still waiting. The legacy of Jebel Sahaba isn't just a story of tragedy, it is a story of engineering. To understand the tactical lethality of the First War, we must dissect the forensic dossier of the weapons that carved through the late Pleistocene. This was a technological revolution fueled by desperation. The primary weapon system of the Jebel Sahaba conflict was the microlithic composite projectile. While we often think of Stone Age weapons as heavy, clumsy hand axes, the reality at Cemetery 117 was a masterpiece of asymmetric warfare. These warriors were utilizing the atlatl, or spear thrower, a tool that transformed the human arm into a high-velocity mechanical lever. In modern ballistic terms, the atlatl increased the standoff distance of the attackers. A hand-thrown spear is limited by the physical strength of the thrower and the drag of the weapon, but the atlatl acted as a force multiplier by extending the length of the throwing arm. It allowed the warrior to launch a dart at speeds exceeding 150 kilometers per hour. At Jebel Sahaba, this was the precision-guided munition of its day. The gritty detail of the impact is where the tactical genius meets the human element. The tips of these darts weren't single, large spearheads. They were tipped with microliths, razor-sharp geometric flakes of chert and chalcedony. When these microliths struck a target, they didn't just penetrate. They shattered and dispersed. Forensic analysis of the skeletons at Cemetery 117 reveals that these stone points were designed to be barbed. Once the point entered the ribcage or the soft tissue of the abdomen, the barbs ensured that the projectile could not be easily extracted. In military terms, this was area denial applied to the human body. Every movement made by the victim after being struck caused the jagged stone flakes to grind against bone and artery, leading to catastrophic internal hemorrhaging. To appreciate the historical significance of Jebel Sahaba, we must compare it to Nataruk, a similar site in Kenya dated to roughly 10,000 BCE. While Nataruk shows signs of a sudden, brutal massacre of a mobile group, Jebel Sahaba is different. Jebel Sahaba shows sustained engagement. The legacy here is the birth of permanent enmity. At Nataruk, the violence was a flashpoint. At Jebel Sahaba, the presence of healed wounds alongside fatal ones suggests a war of attrition. This was a border conflict that lasted for generations. It is the transition from opportunistic killing to calculated military campaigning, the landscape of Jebel Sahaba remains a graveyard of silt, but its tactical logic is alive in every modern conflict. We see the same resource dependency in the oil-rich regions of the Middle East. We see the same flanking maneuvers in modern urban warfare. We see the same human element, the fear, the bravery, and the weight of the gear in every soldier who stands a watch. The real story of Cemetery 117 is that it wasn't an end. It was the blueprint. It was the moment humanity mastered the art of the strike. And as the sun sets over the Nile, the shadows of the atlatls are still there, stretched long across the sand, waiting for the next turning point. The real story of Jebel Sahaba does not end with the burial of the 61. It begins there. In the cold, analytical light of the 21st century, Cemetery 117 has become more than a burial ground. It is a tactical laboratory for understanding the very DNA of human conflict. The legacy of this site is the realization that we did not evolve out of violence, we refined it. As we examine the historical significance today, we must address the psychological warfare of the Neolithic transition. The turning point was not just a change in weaponry, but a change in the human element of perception. At Jebel Sahaba, we see the first evidence of social stratification through combat. Those who survived the Symphony of Chaos became the keepers of the tactical innovation. They became the leaders because they were the ones who knew how to fix and destroy the enemy. This is the genesis of the officer class. The legacy of Jebel Sahaba is the institutionalization of the warrior. It taught us that force projection is the ultimate currency. When we look at the skeletons of the survivors, those who lived long enough to heal from their stone-inflicted wounds, we see the beginning of military prestige. They were the ones who secured the extraction point at the river. They were the ones who ensured the logistical survival of the tribe. But the toll of the war extends far beyond the bones. The geopolitical tension of the Nile, 13,000 years ago, set a precedent for every resource conflict that has followed. When the impossible odds of climate change forced these groups into a kill box, they didn't just fight for food. They fought for a concept of territory. This is the archaeological first of the border. Before Jebel Sahaba, the world was open. After Jebel Sahaba, the world was mapped by blood. The human element of the Jebel Sahaba legacy is a mirror to our modern surgical strikes. The gritty detail of the microlithic barbs found in the spines of the victims is a prehistoric precursor to the fragmentation warhead. The goal has always been the same: to maximize trauma while minimizing risk to the attacker. The landscape was a graveyard, but it was also a proving ground. Today, the heavy silence of a lost battalion hangs over the Nile, but its echo is heard in the tactical briefings of modern generals. We are the inheritors of the Jebel Sahaba doctrine. We are the children of a species that learned to use the Symphony of Chaos to survive the impossible odds. The final turning point in this script is the recognition of the fallen. For 13,000 years, these 61 individuals were forgotten. Now they are the most important soldiers in human history. They are the patient zero of a military record. Their legacy is the somatic memory of war that every one of us carries. The real story of Jebel Sahaba is not that they died, but that they encoded the future. Using high-resolution computed tomography, researchers began to look inside the bone. What they found was a symphony of hidden trauma. They discovered dozens of microscopic fragments of stone shrapnel of the Paleolithic that had been missed by the naked eye for 50 years. These weren't just wounds. They were ballistic signatures. The forensic dossier was expanded. We realized that many of these victims had survived previous attacks. We found remodeling, the body's attempt to heal over a stone point. This changed the historical significance of the site instantly. This wasn't a single massacre, it was a projected campaign. It was a war that lasted for years, perhaps decades. The human element here is the sheer endurance of these people. They were living in a permanent front line. Imagine the psychological warfare of a life where every scar on your body is a map of a previous skirmish, where you carry the gear of your enemy inside your own ribs. This is the gritty reality of the First War. It wasn't a sudden flash of violence. It was a chronic condition of existence. But why does this matter to us, the premium global audience of today? Because Jebel Sahaba is the ultimate predictive model, scientists have identified the trigger for the Jebel Sahaba conflict, the Younger Dryas, a period of abrupt, catastrophic climate cooling and drought. The Nile became a contested corridor. The impossible odds were created by a planet that could no longer support the population. We are currently standing at a similar turning point. As we face modern resource scarcity, the legacy of Jebel Sahaba acts as a warning system. When the extraction points of a civilization, its water, its energy, its food become fixed and finite, the tactical logic of Cemetery 117 returns. The Symphony of Chaos is not a relic of the past, it is a latent sequence in our behavior. The heavy silence of a lost battalion at Jebel Sahaba is now being filled by the data points of modern science. We are learning that the art of war is our oldest survival skill. The landscape was a graveyard, yes, but it was also a classroom. As we close this forensic investigation, we are left with the human element. In the end, the people of Jebel Sahaba were not so different from us. They loved their children, they buried their dead with care, and they fought with tactical ingenuity to protect their future. Their tactical error was simply being caught in the cradle of chaos during a time when the earth turned cruel. The real story of the Jebel Sahaba conflict is a testament to our resilience and a confession of our brutality. It is the archaeological first that reminds us we are the most dangerous and the most desperate creatures on this planet. And as the silt of the Nile continues to wash over the bones of the 61, their legacy remains a silent, ossified prayer that we might one day find an extraction point that does not require a stone-tipped point. Sahaba, the first war. The first warning. If this deep dive into the Symphony of Chaos moved you, don't let the silence of the Lost Battalion reclaim these stories. Deploy-like. If you believe that understanding our bloodiest past is the only way to safeguard our future. Strategic intel. What do you think was the true turning point for humanity? Was it the invention of the weapon or the invention of the enemy? Sound off in the comments. We rate every tactical report. Enlist now, hit subscribe, War Atelier, and toggle the bell icon. We are traveling to the darkest corners of military history, from the stone-tipped ambush of the Nile to the iron-rimmed trenches of the modern age. You don't want to be Mia for our next briefing. History isn't just behind us, it's beneath us. Stay sharp, stay curious. We'll see you on the next battlefield.